Welcome to Galactic University, where the tuition costs 3 arms and a leg, literally, depending on your species. Here we have Professor Cricksthal, a 7-foot-tall Zentorian who looks like someone crossed a praying mantis with a nervous breakdown. His 4 eyes dart around the classroom like he's expecting a surprise attack from the ceiling tiles, which, knowing this place, isn't entirely unreasonable. "Students," Cricksthal announces in his perpetually panicked voice, his mandibles clicking with anxiety. "Welcome to advanced xenobiology. Statistical probability suggests that 47% of you will not survive this semester. Please ensure your wills are updated." The classroom falls dead silent, except for one voice from the back. Wait, is that counting the final exam or just regular Tuesday? Every head in the room swivels toward the source. There, sitting in the back row without so much as a hazmat suit, is Jake Martinez, the human. The only human exchange student in the entire Centauri sector, and apparently the only being in the galaxy who thinks Professor Crickstal's doom and gloom statistics sound like a challenge rather than a warning. Jake's wearing jeans and a t-shirt that says, "My other ride is your mom," in 17 different galactic languages. His feet are propped up on his desk, and he's casually munching on something the professor really hopes isn't a sentient being. "Mr. Martinez," Crickstal says, his voice climbing several octaves, "why are you not wearing regulation protective gear?" Jake looks around at his classmates, all of whom are indeed wearing what can only be described as space-age hazmat suits. "Oh, these things?" He gestures at the protective equipment. "The rental place said they were out of human sizes. Something about most humans not making it past the application process." A collective shudder runs through the class. Everyone's heard the stories about humans. They're the species that looked at a planet-sized predator and thought, "I bet I could ride that." They're the ones who invented something called extreme sports and then got bored with regular extreme sports and invented ultra-extreme sports. They're the species that makes Klingons nervous. Besides, Jake continues, completely oblivious to the terror he's inspiring, how dangerous can these little space critters be? I mean, you guys are calling them specimens. Back home we called dangerous things dinner or the in-laws. Professor Crickstal's mandibles start chattering uncontrollably. In his 43 years of teaching, he's never had a student who radiated such casual disregard for basic survival instincts. It's like watching someone juggle antimatter while riding a unicycle. "Mr. Martinez," the professor manages to squeak out, "these little space critters include apex predators that have been known to consume entire space stations for recreation." "Huh," Jake says, genuinely interested. "Do they do that before or after you pet them?" And that, dear listeners, is when Professor Crickstal realized he was going to need a lot more than his standard anxiety medication to get through this semester. Professor Crickstal takes a deep breath, or whatever Zentorians do when they're trying not to have a complete mental breakdown in front of their students. He pulls up his holographic safety presentation, which is approximately 400 slides long and has more warning labels than a nuclear reactor manual. "Before we begin," he announces, his voice shaking like a leaf in a cosmic storm, "we must review the 47-point safety protocol. Point 1. Never make direct eye contact with any specimen unless you wish to be dissolved from the inside out." "What about indirect eye contact?" Jake interrupts, raising his hand. "Like, what if I look at it through a mirror, or what if I wink at it? Does that count as half-eye contact?" Every student in the class turns to stare at Jake with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for watching someone try to pet a supernova. Professor Crickstal's left eye begins twitching uncontrollably. "Point 2, the professor continues, desperately trying to maintain his composure. Maintain a minimum distance of 50 meters from all containment units unless—" "50 meters?" Jake snorts. "How are you supposed to give them belly rubs from 50 meters away? That's not even good petting distance. That's more like shouting compliments distance." From the front row, Zephyri, a nervous aviarian who looks like someone crossed a toucan with a panic attack, lets out a strangled chirp. "Did he just say belly rubs?" she whispers to her neighbor. Next to her sits Grunk, a silicoid whose species evolved from sentient rocks and therefore approaches everything with the enthusiasm of geological time. "Human behavior patterns remain highly illogical," Grunk rumbles slowly. "Why would one desire physical contact with creatures designed to end existence?" Behind them, Fizz bounces in her seat like a caffeinated electron. As an energy being, she exists in a constant state of barely contained excitement, but even she seems shocked by Jake's casual attitude. Oh my gosh, she vibrates at supersonic speed. Is he actually planning to touch the murder beasts? Professor Kriegstall has now moved on to point 15, which involves something about emergency evacuation procedures and the proper way to write your last will and testament during a containment breach. Jake raises his hand again. Yeah, quick question. What's the university's policy on adopting specimens after the semester ends? Like, if one of these little guys really bonds with me, can I put in an adoption application? The silence that follows is so complete you could hear a quark drop. Professor Kriegstall stares at Jake for so long that several students begin to wonder if the professor has entered some kind of protective catatonic state. Mr. Martinez, the professor finally whispers, these are not pets. These are instruments of cosmic destruction that have been carefully contained for the safety of all known life in the galaxy. Right, but have you tried giving them toys? Sometimes aggressive behavior is just boredom. Back on Earth, we figured out that most dangerous animals just needed better enrichment programs and maybe some quality time with a tennis ball. Zephyr faints. Actually faints. Just topples right over with a little peep sound. Grunk slowly turns his rocky head toward Jake. Human Jake Martinez, do you understand that the creatures we study have been responsible for the extinction of entire star systems? Yeah, but were those star systems, being jerks to them first? Because I've found that most aggressive animals are usually just having a bad day or need some personal space. Professor Kriegstall looks around the classroom, taking in his students' expressions of pure terror mixed with morbid fascination. He's starting to suspect that this semester isn't going to go according to any of his carefully laid plans. In fact, he's beginning to wonder if Jake Martinez might just revolutionize xenobiology entirely. Or get everyone killed. Probably get everyone killed. But maybe, just maybe, revolutionize xenobiology first. Professor Kriegstall's 4 hands are shaking as he approaches the containment unit at the center of the classroom. It's a massive transparent cylinder that hums with enough energy to power a small moon, surrounded by warning signs in 47 different languages. Most of them translate roughly to touch this and die horribly. Students, the professor announces, his voice barely above a whisper, today we observe the apex predator of the Vorkanian system, the creature responsible for the great silence of Sector 7, the beast that single-handedly ended the Turelian War by eating both armies. Behold, the Vorkanian Death-Stalker. The containment field shimmers and fades, revealing what can only be described as nature's answer to the question, what if we made something that was specifically designed to end all other things? The Death-Stalker is roughly the size of a small shuttle, covered in midnight black scales that seem to absorb light itself. It has 6 legs, each ending in claws that could probably cut through battle armor like tissue paper. Its head is elongated and predatory, with rows of teeth that glisten like obsidian daggers. 2 massive yellow eyes scan the room with the cold calculation of a creature that has never met anything it couldn't kill. The class reaction is immediate and predictable. Zephyr, who had just recovered from her earlier fainting spell, promptly faints again with a soft peep. Grunk's rocky exterior somehow manages to look even more terrified than usual, which is impressive for a being made of literal stone. Fizz stops bouncing entirely, which for an energy being is probably the equivalent of cardiac arrest. Half the class dives under their desks and the other half appears to be trying to tunnel through the floor with their minds. Professor Kriegstall himself has gone completely rigid, staring at the Death-Stalker like he's watching his own doom approach in slow motion. Remember, he squeaks, no sudden movements, no loud noises, no... Oh my God, look at those adorable little murder mittens. Every head in the room snaps toward Jake, who is now standing on his desk to get a better view. The Death-Stalker's massive head turns toward him, those yellow eyes locking onto the human with laser focus. Can I pet it? Jake asks, completely oblivious to the fact that he's just made direct eye contact with a creature that supposedly dissolves people from the inside out. I mean, look at those paws, they're huge, and those eyes! Has anyone ever told this little guy how pretty his eyes are? The Death-Stalker tilts its head and makes a sound that's somewhere between a purr and the noise a starship engine makes when it's about to explode. Most of the class interprets this as the creature preparing to devour Jake's soul. Jake interprets this as the creature saying, hello. Professor, seriously, what's the protocol for petting? Because I'm getting some serious please give me attention vibes here. Look, he's doing that thing where he's tilting his head. That's universal cute behavior right there. Professor Kriegstall has gone beyond panic and entered some kind of transcendent state of terror. His mandibles are chattering so fast they're creating a small sonic boom. Mr. Martinez, he manages to whisper, that creature has killed more sentient beings than most galactic plagues. It is not cute. It is not seeking attention. It is calculating the most efficient way to consume your internal organs. Okay, but have you considered that maybe it's only aggressive because everyone keeps treating it like a monster? I mean, if people kept me locked up in a box and whispered about how dangerous I was, I'd probably be pretty cranky too. The Death-Stalker makes that engine purr sound again, and this time it's unmistakably directed at Jake. Its massive tail, which ends in what can only be described as a biological weapon designed by nightmares, swishes once, back and forth. Like a cat showing interest. Grunk's rocky voice rumbles from under his desk. Human Jake Martinez, I believe you have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of this creature. No, I think everyone else has misunderstood the nature of this creature. Look at him. He's practically begging for belly rubs. And those ears? Wait, does he have ears? Those might be sensory organs, but they're twitching like ears. The Death-Stalker's head tilts the other direction, and it takes a step closer to Jake. Not stalking, not hunting, just approaching, like it's curious. Professor Keekstall realizes, with the kind of horrible clarity that comes right before a complete mental breakdown, that Jake Martinez might be about to do something that will either revolutionize their understanding of galactic apex predators or get everyone in the classroom killed in the most spectacular way possible. Probably both. What happens next will either go down in galactic history as the moment xenobiology was revolutionized, or as the shortest exchange program in university history. Jake Martinez hops down from his desk and starts walking toward the Death-Stalker. Mr. Martinez, no! Professor Crickstall shrieks, his voice breaking several octaves and possibly a few dimensional barriers. The safety protocols clearly state, Yeah, 50 meters, no eye contact, don't feed after midnight, Jake waves dismissively, continuing his approach. But look at this guy. He's obviously just been misunderstood. Haven't you, big fella? Yes, you have. Yes, you have been such a misunderstood apex predator. The Death-Stalker, this legendary creature that supposedly ended entire civilizations before lunch, does something that makes every jaw in the classroom drop to the floor. It sits. Not in a predatory crouch, not in an attack position. It sits like a dog. A six-legged, blade-clawed, nightmare-toothed dog. But still, it sits. See? Jake says, now close enough that the Death-Stalker's breath is probably fogging his glasses. Good boy. You're just a good boy who's been locked up too long, aren't you? Nobody ever told you that you were a good boy, did they? From under her desk, Fizz vibrates at a frequency that's making the light fixtures hum. This is impossible, she whispers. Death-Stalkers don't have pack bonding instincts. They don't have any bonding instincts. They have murder instincts and more murder instincts. Actually, Jake says, now reaching out his hand toward the creature, I think you guys have been fundamentally misunderstanding basic animal psychology. This little guy isn't aggressive, he's just overstimulated and under-socialized. Right, buddy? The Death-Stalker sniffs Jake's hand. Its nostrils are roughly the size of dinner plates, and when it exhales, Jake's hair gets blown back like he's standing in front of a jet engine. Then, in a moment that will require therapy for half the class, the Death-Stalker gently nuzzles Jake's palm with its massive snout. There we go, Jake says, now scratching behind what might be the creature's ears. You just needed someone to treat you like a living being instead of a walking apocalypse, didn't you? Yes, you did. Who's a good cosmic apex predator? You are. You're such a good cosmic apex predator. The Death-Stalker's massive tail starts wagging. Wagging. A tail that could probably cut through a space station's hull is now wagging like it belongs to a golden retriever who just got told he's going for walkies. Professor Crickstall has given up on standing and is now sitting on the floor, staring at the scene before him with the wide-eyed expression of someone whose entire worldview has just been turned inside out and used as a dish rag. This is impossible, he mutters. 47 years of xenobiological research. 47 years. Ooh, and look at this, Jake says, now running his hands along the Death-Stalker's flank. These scales aren't armor plating, they're sensory organs. He's been stuck in that containment field getting constant sensory overload. No wonder he was cranky. That's like trying to sleep next to a construction site for your entire life. The Death-Stalker makes a sound that can only be described as a contented rumble. It's the kind of sound a cat makes when it's found the perfect sunny spot. Except this cat is the size of a small spaceship and could theoretically conquer solar systems. And these claws, Jake continues his running commentary, apparently having zero survival instincts whatsoever. They're not weapons, they're digging implements. This guy's probably a burrower. He wants to make dens and tunnels, not slice people into convenient bite-sized pieces. Grunk slowly emerges from behind his desk, his rocky features somehow managing to convey complete bewilderment. Human Jake Martinez, you are suggesting that the most feared predator in known space is actually a pet? Not a pet, Jake corrects, now giving the Death-Stalker what can only be described as belly rubs as the massive creature rolls onto its back. A friend. He's just been lonely. Haven't you, big guy? Nobody ever played with you or told you that you were good at anything except murder. But you're good at lots of things, like being adorable and having the softest belly scales in the galaxy. The Death-Stalker's 6 legs are now kicking gently in the air, and it's making a sound that's unmistakably purring. A purr that's causing minor seismic activity, but still, purring. Professor Crickstall looks around his classroom, taking in his students' expressions of shock, awe, and existential confusion. Then he looks at Jake Martinez, who is currently engaged in an enthusiastic game of tummy rubs with the most feared creature in galactic history. I need a drink, the professor says quietly. I need several drinks. I need to rethink my entire career. I need to call my therapist. I need to call everyone's therapist. Jake looks up from where he's currently scratching behind the Death-Stalker's sensory organs, the massive creature now sprawled on its back like a contented house cat. You know, Professor, this really isn't that complicated once you understand basic human psychology. We've been dealing with this exact situation for thousands of years. Professor Crickstall, who has now progressed from sitting on the floor to lying flat on his back staring at the ceiling, makes a sound that might be laughter or might be the early stages of a complete psychological break. Please, he says weakly, explain to me how this makes any sense whatsoever. Right, so here's the thing. Jake begins, never stopping his rhythmic scratching of what he's decided are definitely the Death-Stalker's favorite spots. Humans evolved alongside pack predators. Wolves, big cats, even reptiles. Our entire survival strategy was based on figuring out which animals wanted to eat us versus which ones just wanted to be left alone. Or, better yet, which ones might be useful allies. The Death-Stalker makes another one of those engine purr sounds, and nuzzles against Jake's shoulder with enough force to knock over a small building. Jake just laughs and keeps talking. See, what you guys are calling apex predator behavior, we call poorly socialized animal having a bad time. Look at the evidence. This guy was kept in isolation, constantly surrounded by electromagnetic containment fields that were probably driving his sensory organs crazy, with everyone who interacted with him treating him like a weapon instead of a living creature. Zephyr has finally managed to stay conscious long enough to peek out from behind her desk, but the colonies, she chirps nervously. The entire star systems that went silent. Yeah, about that, Jake says, now engaged in what appears to be a vigorous game of tug-of-war with the Death-Stalker's tail, which the creature seems to be enjoying immensely. Has anyone ever actually investigated what happened to those colonies? Like, really investigated? Or did everyone just assume that because this big scary-looking guy was in the vicinity, he must have eaten everyone? Professor Crickstall sits up, his scientific curiosity finally overriding his existential crisis. The reports indicated massive destruction, complete absence of life signs. Right, but destruction how? Was it predation patterns, or was it something else entirely? Because from what I can see here, this guy's natural behavior is burrowing. Those claws aren't designed for slashing through flesh, they're designed for moving massive amounts of earth and rock. And those teeth? They're not carnivore teeth. Look at the wear patterns. Jake actually opens the Death-Stalker's mouth, which causes half the class to faint again, but he's right. The teeth, while enormous and intimidating, show wear patterns consistent with crushing and grinding, not tearing flesh. He's not a predator, Jake continues, now letting the massive creature playfully gnaw on his arm while he explains. He's a terraformer. Those destroyed colonies probably weren't eaten, they were probably renovated. This guy's species probably goes to planets and reshapes the landscape, creates underground systems, modifies the environment. The problem is, nobody ever bothered to ask the colonies if they wanted to be renovated. Grunk's rocky voice rumbles with something that might be understanding. You suggest that the Death-Stalkers are environmental engineers? Exactly. Look at him. He's basically a living construction crew. Those sensory organs can probably detect geological instabilities, mineral deposits, underground water systems. He's not trying to kill anyone, he's trying to improve their real estate. The communication breakdown is probably because nobody ever tried to establish a proper first contact protocol. The Death-Stalker, As if to prove Jake's point, begins gently rearranging the classroom furniture with careful precision, creating what appears to be a more structurally sound seating arrangement. Professor Crickstall watches in fascination as his carefully organized classroom is transformed into something that's actually ergonomically superior. But the aggression, Fizz vibrates from her corner. The attacks on space stations. Stress behavior, Jake explains, now sitting comfortably against the Death-Stalker's flank like it's a living couch. Imagine if someone kept you locked in a small room, constantly exposed to painful stimulation, and every time someone came to see you they were terrified and hostile. You'd probably lash out too. Humans figured this out centuries ago with everything from bears to crocodiles. The dangerous label is usually just bad environmental management. Professor Crickstall slowly gets to his feet, staring at his transformed classroom and the contentedly purring creature that's now organizing his teaching materials into neat, logical piles. You're suggesting that our entire approach to xenobiology has been fundamentally flawed. Not flawed, Jake says diplomatically, scratching behind the Death-Stalker's sensory organs again, causing another bout of seismic purring. Just scared. Fear makes you see threats where there might be opportunities. Humans learned a long time ago that sometimes the scariest-looking creature just needs someone to treat them with basic respect, and maybe throw a tennis ball around. We do not have tennis balls in space, Grunk points out. Jake grins. Then we'll have to get creative, but I bet this guy would love a good game of fetch with a small asteroid. The Death-Stalker's tail wags enthusiastically at this suggestion, causing several ceiling tiles to vibrate loose. 3 weeks later, advanced xenobiology has become the most popular class in galactic university history. Not because students are eager to face mortal peril, but because word has gotten out that Professor Crickstall's classroom has been transformed into what can only be described as the galaxy's most unusual petting zoo. Jake Martinez sits comfortably against his Death-Stalker buddy, whose name turns out to be something like Garable Click Purr Rumble, but whom Jake has affectionately nicknamed Digger. The massive creature has become the unofficial classroom assistant, carefully organizing study materials with his enormous claws and providing surprisingly comfortable seating for students during lectures. Today, Professor Crickstall announces, his voice significantly calmer than it was 3 weeks ago, we will be examining the crystalline screamers of the Vega system. Please note that these creatures are known for producing sonic frequencies that can shatter molecular bonds and have been responsible for the destruction of 17 research stations. Jake raises his hand and Professor Crickstall no longer flinches when this happens. Progress. Professor, have we considered that maybe they're not screaming in anger? Maybe they're just trying to sing and nobody's ever taught them about volume control. Digger makes an approving rumble and gently nudges a holographic display into better viewing position for the back row. Zephyr, who now sits confidently in the front row instead of hiding under her desk, chirps up with her own observation. The frequency analysis does show patterns consistent with musical composition rather than aggressive territorial calls. Grunk, who has developed what can only be described as a professional respect for Jake's unconventional methods, adds his slow, measured input. Human Jake Martinez has demonstrated 17 times that apparent aggression often masks unmet social or environmental needs. Fizz bounces excitedly in her seat. Ooh, can we test the theory? I can modulate my energy frequencies to harmonize with their songs. Maybe they just want to join a choir. Professor Crickstall looks around his transformed classroom and realizes something profound has happened here. His students are no longer afraid. They're curious. They're thinking critically instead of just memorizing safety protocols. They're asking what if, instead of how do we avoid dying horribly. Very well, he says, pulling up the containment protocols for the crystalline screamers. But we're going to establish communication protocols first. Jake, I'm putting you in charge of first contact procedures. Sweet, Jake grins, giving Digger an affectionate pat. Step 1, approach with respect instead of fear. Step 2, try to understand what they actually need instead of what we think they're trying to do. Step 3, see if they want to be friends. That is not a scientifically rigorous methodology, Grunk points out. No, Professor Crickstall says slowly, but it has a 100% success rate so far, which is better than our previous approach. As if summoned by the mention of success rates, the Dean of Xenobiological Studies appears in the doorway. Dean Vorthak is an imposing crystalline being who usually makes Professor Crickstall nervous just by existing. Today, however, he seems more confused than intimidating. Professor Crickstall, the Dean says, his voice reverberating like crystal chimes. I've been receiving some unusual reports about your classroom. Something about students requesting to extend their laboratory hours and actually volunteering to work with dangerous specimens. Jake looks up from where he's now braiding decorative patterns into Digger's sensory tendrils. Oh, hey, Dean Vorthak. Yeah, it turns out most of your dangerous specimens are just misunderstood. Digger here has been helping me redesign the containment protocols to be less like solitary confinement and more like proper habitats. Haven't you, buddy? Digger proudly displays a holographic blueprint he's been working on, showing a sophisticated environmental system that addresses the specific needs of different species rather than just keeping them locked in sterile boxes. Dean Vorthak stares at the blueprint, then at Digger, then at the classroom full of students, who are enthusiastically discussing xenobiological theory, instead of looking like they're attending their own funeral. Professor, your mortality statistics have dropped to 0%. Yes, well, Professor Crickstall says, straightening his posture with something that might be pride. It turns out that when you treat potentially dangerous life forms with respect and try to understand their actual needs, they're significantly less likely to kill you. Funny how that works, Jake adds cheerfully. It's almost like most species don't actually want to murder everyone they meet. They just want to be understood and maybe get some decent food and comfortable living conditions. Dean Vorthak looks around the room one more time, taking in the sight of students eagerly planning communication strategies with crystalline creatures, a massive Death-Stalker contentedly organizing educational materials, and a human who seems to have accidentally revolutionized their entire approach to xenobiology through the simple application of basic empathy. Carry on, Professor, the Dean says finally. And Professor, I'm recommending your new methodologies to the Council for Galactic Scientific Standards. After the Dean leaves, Jake looks around at his classmates and their various projects. Zephyr is composing what she calls interspecies friendship songs. Grunk is calculating the mathematical beauty of symbiotic relationships. Fizz is practically vibrating with excitement about next week's lesson on energy beings who might just want someone to dance with. So, Professor, Jake says, giving Digger one final scratch behind his sensory organs, what are we studying next week? Professor Crickstall pulls up his syllabus, which he's been completely rewriting based on Jake's approach. The Phantom Devourers of the Proxima Nebula. They're called Phantom because they phase in and out of our reality, and Devourers because they apparently consume entire space stations. Jake's eyes light up with the kind of enthusiasm that would have terrified Professor Crickstall a month ago. Now, it just makes him curious about what they're going to discover. I bet they're just interdimensional and don't realize they're accidentally bumping into our stuff, Jake muses. Maybe they just need some better spatial awareness training, and probably some interdimensional snacks. Everything's cranky when it's hungry. Digger makes an approving rumble that translates roughly to "this human understands the universe better than most scientists." Professor Crickstall looks at his lesson plan, looks at his transformed classroom, looks at his students who are now excited about xenobiology instead of terrified of it, and makes a note in his gradebook. Human Exchange Program, he writes, extended indefinitely, for the advancement of galactic science and the prevention of further misunderstandings with potentially friendly cosmic entities. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice wonders if maybe, just maybe, humans aren't the galaxy's most reckless species after all. Maybe they're just the galaxy's most optimistic species, which, in a universe full of misunderstood creatures who just want someone to understand them, might be exactly what everyone needed. Even if they do insist on calling everything buddy and asking if they can pet it.